Well, the uneasy Middle East ceasefire is fraying fast as US and Iranian forces exchange fire around the Strait of Hormuz. Well, these attacks reviving fears that the region is sliding back towards an open war once again. Now, all of this together, including fresh attacks on the United Arab Emirates and dramatic threats from Washington, have deepened the sense that a conflict many hoped was winding down is instead entering a new dangerous phase. So today in this edition of From the News Desk, we will break down for you what happened in the last few hours in the Gulf that might set the region on fire once again. US Central Command says American forces struck Iranian military facilities after Iran launched what Washington calls unprovoked missile, drone and small boat attacks on 3 US destroyers transiting the Strait of Hormuz towards the Gulf of Oman on May 7th. US officials emphasized that no American vessels were hit and described the response as self-defense to ensure freedom of navigation through this very vital choke point for the global oil flows. Now, Iran's armed forces present a starkly different picture, accusing the US of breaching the month-old ceasefire by striking an Iranian oil tanker heading towards the strait and hitting civilian coastal areas. In fact, an Iran military spokesperson quoted by state and pro-government media claims that the US conducted aggressive and terrorist airstrikes with the help of unnamed regional partners and insists Iran's attack on US vessels were reciprocal action. Well, Tehran also says its forces then hit US military ships east of the Strait of Hormuz, alleging significant damage, a claim US officials flatly deny. Well, these dueling narratives come on the top of weeks of lower-level skirmishes around Trump's escort missions to reopen the strait, branded as Project Freedom, which aims to break Iran's effective shutdown of the shipping lane while preserving the fragile ceasefire announced in early April. Now, on the flip side, US commander says Iran has launched more than 10 attacks on American forces since the truce began, but argue that until now they remain below the threshold of restarting any major combat operations. Now, despite the latest barrages of missiles, drones and airstrikes, President Donald Trump insists the ceasefire with Iran is going and still in effect, even as he boasts about having completely destroyed the Iranian assets that targeted US warships. Now, interestingly, in an interview with US TV network and subsequent remarks, he downplayed the scale of operation, describing the new strikes as just a love tap rather than a full resumption of war. Yet Trump issued a sharp warning that if Tehran does not quickly finalize what he calls a complete and final agreement, US forces will escalate far beyond Thursday's strike. In fact, on Truth Social, Trump wrote, and I quote, "Just like we knocked them out again today, we will knock them out a lot harder and a lot more violently in the future if they don't get their deal signed." A line that underscores how closely the military tempo is now tied to the stalled nuclear and regional talks. Also, senior US officials echo that dual message of pressure and restraint, saying Washington is not looking for a fight but remains locked and loaded to defend its ships and bases if Iran pushes beyond what White House describes as acceptable violation of the ceasefire. While US and Iranian forces spar at sea, the United Arab Emirates has once again come under heavy fire, reinforcing its role as a frontline state in this very confrontation. Emirati officials say their air defenses intercepted missiles and drones allegedly launched from Iran. Now, in this confusion, some Iranian outlets and regional media initially reported explosions and exchange of fire near the strait, including speculation that the UAE itself might have taken part in airstrikes on Iranian territory. But those suggestions and these reports were played down or explicitly denied. Now, that very episode captures the broader fog of this very conflict. Clashing claims, denial, and rapidly shifting narratives, all unfolding against the backdrop of a ceasefire that exists more on paper than in practice. Well, with American destroyers again trading fire with Iranian forces and Gulf states once again under attack, it increasingly appears, at least to many watching the region, that in the Middle East, war never truly ended, it merely paused.